Aloha, welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. My name is Brad Bordessa, and in this episode, I'm thinking about Uncle George's workshop coming up in 2 weeks, as of when I record this. And so I'm thinking about teaching. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to teach, how to put my classes together, getting my materials all prepared. And I thought that I would maybe share a little bit about how I think about teaching and how I perceive it, maybe how students can learn better. And if, you're not a teacher and you're just a student, it might be insightful to kind of see things from the other side of the ukulele, if you will. Before we do that, though, if you're not already, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and go check out liveukulele.com. If you want to stay up to date on what I'm up to, some of the new products that I'm working on, I've always got something going on, and I try and, share those things out and let people know what I'm working on. You can sign up for my newsletter. You can go to liveukulele.com/sign up and get on my mailing list. I promise I won't spam you. I only send something twice a month at very best, outside of when I release a new product and I'm letting people know what it's about. In which case I will send out a handful of emails across the period of the launch, which will be coming up soon because I'm working on Groove Ukulele, my new ebook on strumming and how basically everything is broken down into one strum. There's one strum and you can create any strumming pattern, any strumming emphasis pattern, which is really what people want to learn when they say, I want to learn strumming patterns. The better way to say it is I want to learn the emphasis pattern for this song, because the huge majority of strumming patterns come from just a down-up strum. And you just go around and around in circles. And what I've tried to share in this ebook and with the accompanying videos to go along with it is how to figure out what these emphasis patterns are, how to learn to play them while keeping your hand motion steady so that you're always locked to the rhythm of the song. Even if you really don't know what the strum is, you can play and you'll be on time, which is the main thing. And a lot of people completely miss that. And a lot of people haven't really figured out this system. Maybe they've intuitively, happened upon it and it's really worked for them. But a lot of people just kind of never notice it, never think about it. And I want to be able to share that with these folks. And hopefully it'll have something to offer for most levels of ukulele players, though it's certainly geared at like advanced beginner, intermediate players who are stuck in a rhythm rut, don't know how to move forwards as far as timing and strumming and creating a rhythm part that is interesting. So if you want to find out more about the ebook, please sign up for my newsletter. I will be sending out information as it arises. I don't know exactly when it'll be released, probably in the next couple of months. I'm still working on getting the videos together. That's usually the most difficult part. But hey, people always ask for videos. So in this case, we've got the ebook. It can really benefit from some visuals. So I'm making videos to go along with everything. So for those who want to read, they can just check out the ebook. And for everybody who wants to read and get a little bit more and see exactly what's going on, there will be comprehensive videos about each concept as well. So stay tuned. And with that said, let's jump right in. I'm going to share a little bit about how I approach teaching. Needless to say, teaching is a huge subject and cannot be covered in a single podcast whatsoever. But there are a couple of things that I have stumbled upon over the years that have kind of helped me navigate, especially group class situations. Because there's basically two kinds of teaching. There's private lessons, which is just one-on-one. Hey, I want to learn this. Teach me how to play this. And you show them that. And then there's kind of like a workshop group class where usually the class has a set subject. And if it doesn't have a set subject, I, as the teacher, decide on something that I'm going to teach. People show up and I share these things with them. But You may know about this, you may not, but skill level is shaped like a bell curve. We've all probably heard of the bell curve in some form or another, but ukulele players definitely fit onto a bell curve, which means there are at one end, there's a handful of just very, very beginner people. And as you get better and better, there's more and more and more players, and the bell goes up. But then, as you get from intermediate into more advanced, people become, they don't advance quite as far. They kind of get stuck in a rut. Maybe they're not inspired. Maybe they put the ukulele down, whatever it is. The number of players at a higher level drops off dramatically. And at the very end, there's just only a handful of really great ukulele players. And that ends up being the bell curve that we have to deal with as teachers. Because the bell curve sits in the middle. What level are you? If you ask that question, the huge majority of people, because of how levels work and the bell curve, the huge majority of people are going to say, I'm an intermediate. I'm in the middle. I'm bang down the middle of the bell curve, where the most ukulele players exist on the skill spectrum. And that is really not helpful at all as a teacher to know that, oh, you're an intermediate player. That tells me nothing, absolutely nothing, because that could be anything from, oh yeah, I can play C, F, and G7, or it means, I can solo pretty comfortably through some scales, but I don't feel like I'm really advanced yet. And anything in between. And it's that anything in between that makes teaching in a group class very challenging, because you'll have mostly intermediate players. And usually the beginner players have their own dedicated class, and usually the advanced players will gravitate towards one-on-one private lessons, just because that's kind of how it just works out. If you're at that level, when running a workshop and organizing workshop classes, it doesn't make sense to have an advanced class if only one person's going to show up for it, right? It's not efficient for the time that you're paying your teachers to be there. It's not efficient for them to teach only one person at a time when they could be teaching another group class and be covering a subject that is a little bit more widely interesting for folks. So a lot of times, teachers will be assigned, it's time for private lessons. So that is when advanced players will come to you with their specific questions. Okay, so if you're a beginning player, rejoice, because there's always a beginning class, and it's always pretty straightforward to help a beginning player get started. But because of the bell curve, most of the things that I talk about, most of the things that I teach end up being for intermediate players. So I have a class of intermediate players all across the board. Everybody thinks they're intermediate, and none of them can adequately tell me what they can play. So as a teacher, I have the job of trying to entertain 12, 15, 18 people, maybe less, but usually not, and try and give them each something that they can learn in that class without overwhelming them and without making them bored because it's not advanced enough. Right? Let's say 12 people. I got to have 12 different little things that are mostly right down the middle and or can be adjusted for each person's playing level. See the problem here? For a long time, this really stumped me, and teaching was always just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, feeling like, trying to hang on, trying to teach something that would be adequate for everybody, but teach something very specifically. And then I kind of realized that teaching something very specifically is fine, but you need to have ways to kind of tweak it as you go to capture the interest of the people on one end or the other. Assuming that the bell curve is even, if you can teach right down the middle, you're going to capture most of the class. But for the people on the edges of the intermediate part of the bell curve, they might be bored or they might be super overwhelmed. So what I've started doing, and I started doing this probably around the same time I started teaching at Uncle George's workshop, kind of probably because I needed to be able to figure this out to be relevant in that kind of environment, but was to start teaching things where I could very easily and quickly kind of dodge my way around the skill level and have several different difficulties of whatever we're working on happening at the same time, or something that you can play at the same time. Sometimes this is one part of the class playing chords, one part of the class picking, and I let them kind of self-determine where they feel most comfortable, what they want to be doing in the class. And sometimes it's just different variations on the same thing, where you have a more basic one, and then you build it up so that you have maybe a truly intermediate one, and then you have a more advanced one for the people who fall on the more advanced side of things. And as soon as I figured this out, I found that teaching in a group really became a lot more simple, because I was able to reach everybody. Like, oh, you're bored. Here's a little extra thing that you can add that will significantly increase the challenge of what's happening in this moment, without alienating everybody in the middle that we've already worked on something and learned how to do something. They can continue to do their thing, but I can take a minute, maybe two, to give the more advanced players a little bit more to chew on. And I tell everybody else, it's like, if this doesn't make any sense to you, if this seems overwhelming, just ignore it. Just keep doing what you've been doing. And so this has given me a lot more freedom in being able to teach things at that bell curve level and try and reach everybody in the same exact class, because there are going to be always a huge, wide variety of skill levels. So if you are an aspiring teacher and you're going into a group situation, I highly recommend having several ways to interact with the material that you're teaching. Say you're teaching a song, right? That's the most basic, straightforward type of music lesson. It's like, okay, here we are with this song. Let's learn to play the song. Boom. And just within that, don't become set on, well, they're intermediate players, so they should be able to play this song using closed position chords. We're going to learn a couple new chord changes within the song, and that's what we're going to do. If you're that set in your ways, odds are you're going to lose people on either edge, because it's either too hard or too easy. So what you need to be able to do is use that song as a framework for, here's the gist of what I want to be able to share with most of the people. But if you're overwhelmed by this, just play a normal C chord. Just play a normal F chord, right? And if you're more advanced, here is an additional higher voicing of the chord. Try and play this voicing, then this voicing while you're on the same chord, so that, the more advanced players, they're getting stretched, and the more beginner players, they're not being overwhelmed. They can work on the things that they need to be working on. So that's probably my biggest angle that I've been seeing teaching from for these past 5 years or more, is to really be prepared to have many things in your bag of tricks to pull out at any given point, so that you can always pivot and always keep everybody happy. With that said, there are moments when the student's going to be wrong and you're going to be right as the teacher. And maybe they're beginner, they don't believe in themselves, they think that this is too advanced. There's no way I could ever do that. And you as the teacher say, no, I know you can. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. Think about it this way instead. And you kind of convince them that they can do it. And all of a sudden, you've been able to share your agenda, for lack of a better term. And they feel empowered. They feel excited. They did something more challenging than they thought. So it's a fine line between bending over and realizing, okay, you're very beginner. You need to have something easier to do. Let me show you the basic chords, and you can just play the basic chords for the remainder of the class and, back us up. It's not just like you're doing some menial task that doesn't matter. You are playing something that is running parallel to what we're doing in the main body of the class. You still participate in the music, still playing an important part. In fact, a lot of times I lean on the beginner players to hold down the rhythm while I do something more advanced with the rest of the people in the class. And so those beginning players actually kind of have more responsibility because they're holding down the foundation of things, and they get to participate in an elevated way in that sense. But there are also times when you'll get kind of a hotshot player in your class who thinks they know everything, and you have to convince them that, no, really, this is important, and if you play it simply like this, you're going to learn things from that you wouldn't have gotten if you just skimmed over it and was like, no, I know how to play this already, diddly, 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 dee. That is another part of the challenge. And so as the teacher, this is the joy, right? Because it's, in a sense, it's like performing. You are performing a class, and you have to take in this information. Okay, how are they doing? Are they achieving this goal? And parse it all in real time and do it times 12 for every student in the class and figure out, am I on track for the majority of folks? Am I on track for this person who doesn't seem like they're getting it? And a lot of times, as a teacher, you also have to read people and personalities, because all the time I teach a class and everybody's just flat face, poker face. You know, they look bored. They look like they would rather be anywhere else in the world than in my class. And it's like, ooh, boy, I've lost everybody in the class. They can play the stuff, but they're just not connected. They're not into it. And then at the end of the class, everybody's like, oh, wow, that was so great. I learned so much. That was brilliant. You're an awesome teacher, da-di-da-di-da. And I'm like, well, you had me fooled because it looked like you were miserable. But it's really that performance of teaching that keeps bringing me back and makes teaching so exciting. And, you know, it's not like a stage performance. You're not up there in front of a huge group of people. You're not presenting your music necessarily. You can, but it's usually not the case. But in a way, it is a performance because you are performing how you interact and assess everybody in your class all in real time. And for me, that's really exciting. It's a challenge for sure, but it's also, if you get it right, it's really super rewarding because you can bring joy to 12 people, 15 people, 18 people, all at the same time by helping them learn something in a new way. And to me, that's just super beautiful. And that's why I like to teach, is it's a challenge. And you also get to help people play music a little bit better. And even if they don't learn to play something a little bit better, it's just having that connection with the music and that interaction with teacher-student where the student is giving their effort. I, as the teacher, am giving my effort, and it's kind of an exchange. And even if there weren't any like huge breakthroughs in the class, which become fewer and farther between as you advance, unfortunately, but we're still making that exchange, and a lot of times there are things to be gained from that and things to be learned, even if there's nothing radically different about the music. You know, the student might interpret something a little bit differently, and I can be excited for their awareness, perhaps, of the music in that new way. Something that I learned from James Hill a long time ago is class pacing. And it's not something that I learned and then have moved on from. It's something that I'm continuing to learn. But James is really the one who made me aware of it, where he would, and I can't remember if he actually told me this or I was in a teaching class that he did or something, because I never went to Jehui or anything like that. I asked James at one point at a workshop where I was attending and he was teaching, and we kind of, became friends through the workshop, and we would just hang out in the off hours. But I asked him, I was like, do you think I should go to Jehui? And he's like, it might be helpful, but you seem like a clever guy. You'd probably, you already have a handful of your own resources, your own sheets that you've created. I think you can probably figure it out on your own if you're not interested in doing the Jehui thing. And so with that vote of confidence, I felt like I was able to, I was kind of given permission to just keep on keeping on, keep on figuring out the things that you want to teach, the ways you want to teach them, and how you want to explain them and have handouts, and how you want your students to visualize the things that you're teaching. Anyways, something that I learned from James is pacing and keeping a movement in the class. Because really the momentum of learning and the momentum of music is very important in keeping everybody engaged and keeping their attention and keeping the vibe up in the class. It must have been in an actual class where he explained this, because he was joking about how he can be on a great roll and everybody's learning something new and everybody's enjoying the music. And then somebody asked in the back, I have a question. What kind of strings do you use? And completely derail the class. And so you need to be able to keep your momentum as best as possible while you have it, right? While you're working with that inspiration, you get on a little roll, you play something through and everybody's got it. That was great. Let's take it up a notch. Let's do the next thing. Let's move along. Try to keep that going. Now, that's not to say don't answer questions, because you need to answer some questions. But if you can, try and keep it on topic to what you're teaching at the time. And if you have room at the end to answer what kind of strings you use, then great, you can address that. But try to keep the flow of your class and the main body of your content moving as best as possible. And part of that, this is the main thing I learned from James, part of that is to keep the beat of the music going so that everybody in class is always, or for a large majority of the class, is engaged to the same cadence, right? Instead of playing something and, oh, you messed it up, we need to try it again, and stopping, he would always snap his finger or tap his foot and keep the music going. Even though we didn't play it right, even though we had to do it again, he would keep the rhythm going as he explained what was going to happen next, what we needed to adjust. And then when it was time, it would just be 3, 4, and we would try it again. Instead of breaking the flow and breaking the rhythm, it's a lot easier to kind of keep everybody on by keeping that rhythm going. Even if you aren't actively playing, you keep the cadence going and you make it easy for people to understand when you're going to jump in again. Because a lot of times what folks need is repetition. We as teachers feel that there is somewhere to be for our class and that we need to cross a finish line and get through all the material. But a lot of times, I've learned, is that people want to work on what you're teaching them. They want to have a chance to practice it. And a lot of times, I tend to overteach and teach a little too fast and not give people a chance to breathe, think about what they've been learning, and to succeed at what they're learning. And so I've been, over the past few years, trying to get to a point where I let people have the time to play through the material over and over and over again. And, it's something to feel out to make sure that you're not boring them. But for the most part, I found that people don't mind playing something again. And really, the only people who are going to be bored by that kind of thing are the people who don't know which lane they're in, right? Stay in your lane. That's the kind of person who's going to be like, can we move on to the next thing? They're usually going to be the ones who think they're ready for the next thing. They haven't actually mastered what you're working on. But the majority of folks are going to appreciate a moment to continue going. So that's where keeping that pacing going, and even if you're sharing a tip, you kind of keep the beat going so that when it's time to play again, everybody's on the same page. They're still hearing the beat. They're still hearing the cadence. And when you go 3, 4, you can just go right back into it. And you're not wasting time with things like, it sounds silly, but with things like 1, 2, 3, 4. How long does that take? Is that one count a second? That seems a little fast. But even if it's 2 seconds that you can eliminate by having a little bit of that short edited moment taken out of your class, that little bit of drudgery of the extra count, if you can get them all on the same page by keeping the click going, and then you just 3, 4, or ready, go, it's that much easier for everybody to just jump right in, know exactly what's happening, know exactly what they need to do, and to succeed that much faster. Because really, time is money when you're trying to get people on the same page and playing the same thing. So if you can keep them going and just recycle them, like, okay, that wasn't good, but let's try it again, go, you're going to be able to save a lot of time, as opposed to if you try and stop after everyone. It's like, okay, well, what did you do wrong? Do you want to try it again? Okay, let's try it again. 1, 2, that's like 15 seconds you've already wasted when you could have played it 3 more times in that same amount of space. So that's another important thing. And, like I hopefully made kind of clear in the beginning, is this is just a collection of thoughts regarding teaching. It's not necessarily, Brad's be all end all how to teach podcast. It's just some thoughts, just some things that I've found to be important over the years, things that I've found to be useful over the years, and things that seem to kind of work. Because usually if I crash and burn, I don't do the same thing again. I realized that, well, that was kind of a flop. Time to go back to the drawing board and try something different. Because not everything's a success. Especially at the workshop, I'm really grateful that Uncle George, Auntie Nancy, and Scott Hillman, they let us kind of put together our own teaching curriculum. Each of us teachers, Scott always asks, what do you want to teach this year? And give me a little blurb about it so I understand what's happening. I can write a little title for it, and we can let people know what these classes are. Because in order for the teachers to stay interested and engaged, you don't want to teach the same workshop you've been teaching for 10 years at every single workshop. I couldn't imagine how boring that would be. That's, you want to do things differently. And one thing that I've noticed at workshops, and this is, not to detract from the students in any sort of way, because however you enjoy this sort of musical gathering is wonderful. It's great. It's just nice to see everybody again every year. But a lot of folks don't necessarily put in the time that they would need to in order to max out everything they learned in the previous year. That would be a lot of practice, and only in a very, very small handful of people seem like they return to the workshop with open arms and like, I am ready for a new batch of homework. That's like nobody ever. It's always, the same folks who are just as excited to be there again, but they probably haven't practiced enough. And a lot of the things that you're going to be sharing with them are the same things as last year, just in a different way. So what I try and do in order to keep myself entertained, instead of just like, oh God, we did this last year, well, these people never practice. Instead of having that sort of mindset, I think we as teachers find different ways to approach the same thing, to teach it in different ways. And this is what I try and do with my lessons, also with my ebooks and my video courses, is I try and present things in ways that are a useful contrast for students so that they hear maybe the same things that they've been hearing about, but they see it in a different way. Because I've decided to change it up for myself, or I've seen enough of a certain subject to know what resonates best, what helps people move along the fastest. And so every year, Scott asks, what do you want to teach? And I say, 3 or 4 new class ideas, things that I've been kind of percolating on, things that would seem like they'd be fun. I try and throw out a couple of new subjects or a couple of new angles on things that I think would be interesting. And then I usually throw in kind of an off-the-wall class that's like, this would be fun. And usually Scott doesn't put those on the schedule. But that's okay. It's always a surprise. And I always do enough new things that it's not boring. It's not like, oh, I did this last year. And it's usually never boring, even if you do the same things again, because no class is ever the same twice. But having new material and a new angle brings a lot of inspiration to the class, I feel, because even if you have repeat students that you saw last time you gave a workshop on a very similar thing, even if they haven't practiced, even if they didn't fully learn what you taught last time, by having a new angle on it, being able to approach the concept from a different direction, they're going to be engaged. They're going to feel like, oh, wow, I never thought about it that way before. This is really helpful. And, you go like, yes, it's very helpful. This is the same thing we've talked about before because it's similar, just you haven't thought about it in this way. But also that's the beauty of teaching, is figuring out a way to share the material so that it clicks, because it doesn't click the same way for every single person. That's why I have people who get my material or one of my ebooks or my video courses, and they say, I don't really get it. It doesn't seem that useful to me. And I'm like, great, here's your money back. I don't want your money because you are not the kind of student I'm trying to reach. We're not on the same wavelength, and that's fine. Go try somebody else. Certainly there's somebody else out there who can help you find that. And, that's why we can all be in business and not really be in competition with each other, because I teach things completely different from Matt Dahlberg. Matt Dahlberg teaches things completely different from James Hill. James Hill teaches things completely differently from Victoria Vox. And we can all coexist, and we can all be friends and peers and, kind of look up to each other. And it's this great synergy, and we all kind of push each other forwards because there's room for everybody. Everybody has a different style, teachers and students, teaching styles and learning styles. So I think that is a really cool thing to think about. And to, if you're a student, don't try and force yourself into this to conform to a teacher whose style doesn't really match. Have the awareness to find a different class, find a different teacher, try somebody else. Because if you come to my class and you're not inspired by what we're doing, we're both wasting our time. You might as well go to another class, especially at a workshop situation like Uncle George's. There's always something different going on. And in any given time slot, there's almost never just one class to choose from. There's something else to try and a different teacher. Because we can't be in multiple places at once, you'll have a different teacher at a different class. You can go there. And if that really turns you on and makes you feel excited to play music, that's where you should be. That is your people. That teacher is going to be somebody who resonates with you a little bit better. And as teachers, I think we should embrace this. Don't feel bad if it doesn't work out between you and a student. I am happy to send students elsewhere because it's going to be miserable for both of us if we try and force it. If I try and help them learn something that I'm not really interested in, and, maybe their learning style doesn't match with mine. For instance, I don't teach blues. I don't know anything about blues except for kind of a crappy Hawaiian style ukulele player version of the blues where you put a flat 7 in every once in a while. It's not real blues. And so if somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I want to learn blues. Can you teach me blues?" I'm like, nope, keep on looking for somebody else, because that's not my wheelhouse. I'm not going to be able to help you adequately. And I know that. And I think it's important for teachers to know their lane. It would be so much easier if everybody just knew which lane to stay in. Yeah, metaphorically and literally. But it's not so straightforward as that. And the biggest thing you can cultivate as a teacher is empathy. Right? Just trying to understand where everybody's at, trying to help them find what they're looking for in music, which is almost always some sort of joy, right? We're in the business of making people happy. And I just love that. That is really, really something that I'm happy and fortunate to be part of. It's super cool. And, every year I go back to Uncle George's workshop and reconnect with students. I've been going back enough times that I've sort of seen the arc of folks who have, a lot of people don't come every single year. So you see people who came 3 years ago and they come back. And if you're teaching for long enough at these different workshops, you'll start to see repeat faces and, you build a rapport. And it's really great because teaching a cold class is hard. If you don't know anybody in the class, they don't know you, that's really tough because you gotta earn their trust and their respect, right? And how do you do that? I try and make them laugh, tell a dumb joke or something, just to loosen them up so they don't think I'm, a super hard ass. I'm kind of a hard ass, but you want to make it fun for people and they feel like they're not going to be intimidated. You're not going to crack the ruler on their knuckles, kind of a thing. And so I just feel so fortunate that I get to keep coming back every year to this workshop and seeing the same faces. And we can really start off from a familiar face. Even if there's one person that I know, you can kind of kind of lean the class towards them because you know them. You can interact with them and you can maybe crack a joke. They know that you're not, serious when you say something stupid or silly. They get it. They get your flow a little bit. And when other people see that that person knows the drill and is comfortable in the situation, then other people start to feel more comfortable in the situation. And so just try and make everybody feel welcome and provide them with something that they can chew on at whatever level they're at. That is the teacher's job. And James and I had an interesting discussion about this a couple months ago. He interviewed me for his Uketropolis podcast. I'll try and remember to put a link to the podcast in the show notes. But we were talking about artistry in teaching. Can you be an artist and bring artistry to teaching? And so we had a discussion, and I really encourage you to listen to the podcast because I thought it was super interesting to hear his thoughts. And I'd like to think that I said at least a couple smart things in the whole 45-minute interview. But we had fun. It was a good time, and check it out if you can. But we were talking about this artistry thing, and the conclusion was, I don't know, what do you think? But something that I said on the podcast, and I'll reiterate here, that's something, not necessarily a rule to live by, but it's something interesting to think about, is I heard Joe Satriani early on when I was playing and teaching. This was probably 15 years ago. I saw a YouTube interview of Joe Satriani, and he said that, because he's a guitar teacher, and he said, my job as a teacher is to present the information with as little personal bias as possible, right? And what that means to you, a little bit up to interpretation. But that personal bias is really interesting because when you're a teacher, you are sort of in charge of a bunch of brains, right? You are in charge of informing minds. And your job, if you take what Joe said to heart, which I kind of have, because it's, it can go either way, and there are always exceptions to rules, but I don't need to bring my baggage to your learning. That's none of your business. You shouldn't need to know that, right? If I, just to be kind of real straightforward and bland as far as an example goes, but if I say, I don't like rap music, right? Because it's just talking and they swear and, whatever kind of grumpy things you have to say about a genre of music. If I have somebody in my class who does like that style of music, I don't want to drag them down and make them feel, like, oh, well, I'm certainly not going to learn that here, but also like, why'd they have to bring me down because they don't like that? That's none of the students' business. They shouldn't have to be dealing with your preconceptions of anything while they're also trying to learn what you're teaching them. So in a way, I really try and keep my biases to a minimum. Not that I think that any genre is bad, right? Everybody just has their taste. It might not be my cup of tea, but I try and provide something so that anybody in any genre or any student who is interested in playing any genre could have something to think about and maybe take to that genre when they went to go play it. But it goes far beyond genres, and it approaches other things as well. Maybe I don't play something with a certain technique and they saw a technique from somebody else. There are so many paths with music and so many different ways to teach that you don't want to ever, unless it's going to physically harm the student to play something a certain way, I don't see any reason to negate what they've already learned or what they've seen. Always try and just gently guide. Of course, you have to bring your expertise to the table. That's what you get paid for. That's why you're there. But there's no reason to invalidate a valid way of playing, something that somebody else uses, just because I don't, triplet strum or play in kind of a cherry picking style like Tobias Eloff or James Hill. Of course, I love that style, but it's not in my wheelhouse. It's not a way that I play. at all, that doesn't make it, even if I didn't like that style, there's no reason to share that with students. It's irrelevant. You just you help them stay in their lane without attaching any baggage to it. So if somebody wants to learn cherry picking, I just say, yo, that's not my thing. I don't really know. I don't play in that style, so I'm not the best person to play that. You should go ask Tobias. So with that in mind, you try and teach with, an awareness of your bias. Not necessarily that you're never going to be biased, you're never going to share your opinion in class, because a lot of times when people ask questions, topics come up where they're looking for your opinion because they value your opinion. And that's a great thing. That's, shows that they trust you and that they're interested in hearing what you have to say, which is an amazing thing in this time of the world, right? But at the same time, just be aware of that. It's kind of like a responsibility as a teacher to have an opinion. So just be aware of that as you're teaching, and that don't give them any extra baggage that they don't need. Share your opinion, but make it about you. Like, this is how I choose to play. It's not the only way to play. You can do whatever you want. This is how I do it. I try and always, say I words. That's a good relationship tip. I've learned that over the years. I think, I need, right? You make it about you. You don't make it about the other person. So another little bit of food for thought. And with that, I think that is a lot of things for folks to chew on. I don't know how universally interesting teaching advice is here on the podcast. I know there's a lot of players. I know there are a lot of folks who do teach and do share music in, from retirement homes to workshops to private lessons to, teaching their grandkids, whatever it is. That is wonderful. And hopefully you learn something. And if you're not a teacher, if you're just a student, you should try and teach, because I find you learn way more teaching than the student learns, I think. Because I can go to any number of classes and sit in and okay, yeah, that makes sense. I can learn to play the thing. But I don't really understand it until I teach it myself, which is part of how I choose the workshop topics that I want to teach. I try and teach things that I'm still learning to understand and I'm still processing through. That's sort of, as a musician, that's how I, mentally work through a problem. It's like, well, if I teach it, the students are going to help me see the different things that I need to consider so that I can help share it with them better. And so it's real time, kind of learning yourself real time. What is important here? What is not important here? What is useful? What is not useful? And of course, you don't want to be doing this completely on the fly where you have no idea what's going on. But if you do it in a controlled environment, in a way, you can really learn a huge amount from the students. And they don't know this. And they don't know this until I tell them. No, I learn just as much from you guys as you learn from me. It's different things that we're learning. But by watching you play, I see that, oh, wow, just intuitively, that's how they play it. That's so weird. I never thought to play it that way. They're a person. There's probably somebody else out there who also plays in that way. That would be an interesting thing to incorporate with my teaching, so I can help people either do it that way easily in the future or avoid doing it that way in the future. So you're always collecting data as a teacher. If you're tuned out because you think something is below you or above you or any of those things, you're probably missing out on a lot of opportunities to really learn the craft of teaching and learn the craft of music. I know Jimi Hendrix once said that even bad performances, he always found one thing that he could learn from the performance. One thing that they did well that he could take with him and apply to his music. And I think that's a super valuable skill. Instead of just being butthurt about something or oh, this is boring, what is useful in that information? Anything, not just an ukulele class, but anything, any production you see, any writing you see, any kind of smart thinking that you see, how are those people processing through that, and how are they utilizing it? How are they presenting it? All of those things are valuable. That's all valuable data as a teacher. Whew. So that's kind of a lot. I'm all pumped up, ready to go. I hope to see at least a few of you at Uncle George's workshop. I don't know where registration is at. It's 2 weeks out. It'd be kind of crazy to just up and head to a workshop that you weren't planning for 2 weeks ahead. But hey, you only live once. So if you want to find out more, I'll put a link in the podcast description. Check it out. If anything, follow along on, I guess Facebook. There's usually a tag for the workshop. You can see what people are posting up. I won't be posting because I'm not on Facebook. But there are a lot of people who are, and I'm sure they will be sharing things out there. So thanks for tuning in. The Live Ukulele podcast is published on the first and third Saturday of every month. I will see you next month on the first Saturday. I will have to come up with some sort of a podcast because I will be on Maui teaching at the workshop. I have to do some scheduling magic to make sure the podcast goes up at the right time. But got some fun stuff in the pipes. Got a few people that I'm hoping I can talk to at some point soon on the podcast. But also I've got Chris Fujigami on the line. We're planning on meeting up mid-June sometime. He's going to come up here to the studio and we'll probably hear him play some stuff. Talk story with Chris. He lives on Big Island. I'm on Big Island. So yeah, share some Big Island music stories and see what he's up to. Keep an ear out for that one. I will catch you next time. Keep on jamming out there. Hui ho.